Every single year, more money is laundered than the GDP of entire nations. Pause on that fact. More wealth flows through hidden channels than some countries generate in total. But how did this shadow economy grow so enormous? To answer, we'll trace its unlikely path, from the smoke-filled rooms of Prohibition-era casinos to laundromats that mask dirty cash, and finally to billion-dollar real estate and digital currencies. What began as a street trick has become a global system shaping crime, power, and even politics. Stay with us until the end, because this story explains far more than hidden money. It unlocks how the world works today. And if you enjoyed journeys like this one, don't forget to subscribe to Night Atlas so you never miss the hidden stories shaping our world. Imagine the 1920s for a moment, a time when America pulsed with jazz, neon doorways flickered to life at night, and hidden cellars poured liquor even though the law forbade it. Streets filled with the rhythm of new music, but in quiet corners, backroom casinos echoed with the shuffle of cards and the clink of coins. Behind this music and glow, however, lay a flood of money no one could explain in honest books. The so-called noble experiment of Prohibition created an underground world where alcohol never truly disappeared. It only shifted hands, and with each bottle exchanged, thick stacks of cash piled higher and higher. Picture a bootlegger leaving one of those smoky bars with a satchel. Inside, crumpled bills gathered in more abundance than he had ever carried before. Multiply that by hundreds of others doing the same each night, and the totals swelled into mountains. Criminal organizations quickly realized that they were no longer merely selling drinks. They were building entire economies in the shadows. For enterprising figures, this was both opportunity and danger. The money was tempting beyond measure, yet it also carried the weight of exposure. Where could such wealth be hidden without alerting every watchful eye? The banks sat just downtown, tall and confident, their marble pillars suggesting safety. Yet a man known to run liquor could not simply walk in with a suitcase heavy with coins and notes. Tellers would raise eyebrows, managers might whisper, and soon investigators would appear asking questions. Large deposits, especially in repeat patterns, revealed themselves like flares against a dark sky. So the problem at the heart of the underworld was simple, but crushing. Profits soared, but there was no clear path to make the money look respectable. Al Capone, a name etched into countless stories from this era, thrived in this problem and shaped many of the solutions. Known for his domination of Chicago's bootlegging and gambling networks, Capone oversaw an empire larger than many legitimate corporations. His men carried endless cash, pouring in from speakeasies, horse races, and card games. Yet even Capone, whose grip on the city was both feared and shamelessly visible, could not parade this wealth openly. Those suitcases, stuffed with stained bills, could not stay locked in a cellar forever without losing value or inviting theft. In dimly lit basements, the air thick with smoke, stacks of cash sat waiting like trapped animals, desperate for a disguise. Some turned to common hiding places, brick walls with loose stones, false floors, or even barrels nailed shut. But these measures only delayed the question. Money had to be moved and transformed to grow. Keeping it locked away meant serving as its guard rather than its master. What criminals needed was a way to reintroduce it into society without drawing a single suspicious glance. They required a costume convincing enough that the audience, the public, the banks, and the tax collectors would believe in it completely. This is where the idea of the front business rose as both shield and stage. Consider the laundromat. Its rows of whirring machines always busy, coins rattling as clothes spun. What better setting to mix clean with unclean? Unlike mills or factories, laundromats dealt with consistent, heavy flows of coins and modest cash. If a real store took in a steady trickle of quarters and bills each day, who could argue if the books reflected a slightly larger number? The machines did not testify. The detergent offered no evidence. In reality, the laundry may have served only a handful of customers. On paper, though, it could appear to serve hundreds. Imagine an operator quietly sliding $500 of bootlegging profit into the day's till. The receipt book then told a story. Customers arrived, paid, and left. The profit, born from a bottle passed across a smoky bar, now became the price of washed sheets. Multiply that act over weeks and months, and the criminal begins to appear less like an outlaw and more like an ordinary shop owner. The bank teller receiving the deposit no longer wonders, because laundromats naturally dealt in cash, and small bills carrying the scent of coins felt consistent. This pattern was copied across the underworld: diners, car washes, small theaters, even dance halls. All cash-heavy businesses provided the same opportunity. Numbers could be inflated on ledgers without attracting deep suspicion. If the restaurant down the block reported busy Fridays and steady weekdays, the tax officer lacked the tools to prove otherwise. Account books, handwritten and stamped, became both fiction and shield. The world of paper records was easy to manipulate, easier still when authorities had few resources to check. No digital systems tracked these inconsistencies. No electronic trail existed. Only the shop's word stood, and in the noise of the roaring 20s, that word was strong enough. As stories spread, the laundromat became almost symbolic, standing not only as a practical method, but also as a metaphor. The notion of washing away filth to create something that appeared refreshing felt natural. Dirty money went in, clean numbers came out. The term money laundering grew from these practices, weaving language with imagery in a way that still shapes how we talk today. The phrase did not emerge in polished boardrooms or government papers. It sprouted in the streets, breathed out by those who learned that cash could wear another skin, one crisp and socially accepted. The connection between jazz clubs and bookkeeping may seem unlikely, yet they were deeply linked. In a speakeasy where trumpets blared and dancers swirled, coins filled jars and bills exchanged hands rapidly. These earnings could be quietly siphoned off into a nearby cafe, reported as thriving with morning rushes. A few men keeping the ledger could tell both stories, one that admitted to lawless nights and another that showed honest sales. To authorities, the cafe paid its taxes, stayed open, and functioned like any respectable pursuit. The truth remained concealed beneath, hidden in habits of simple arithmetic. As word spread among criminal networks, even those far from Capone's orbit realized this technique could be copied. Bootleggers in smaller towns, running only a handful of stills, also found comfort in running a gas station or food stand. Suddenly, their piles of suspicious cash transformed into legitimate daily income records. By the time inspectors asked questions, the paper trail painted a portrait of busy kitchens or bustling car washes. The human imagination, when paired with the desire to protect wealth, needed only small props: a cash box, a receipt slip, a plausible story. You can almost see how this practice became less about individual hiding and more like a system, and art. Illegal wealth began flowing through these small businesses like water flowing into jars, each container masking its source. If one jar broke, in other words, if one shop received too much scrutiny, others still carried the current quietly. This adaptability made the movement of money far more durable than any one gangster or any one neighborhood. It was no longer about an isolated trick, but an evolving culture of disguise. The irony of this growth lies in the fact that the public often became unknowing collaborators. Visitors buying sodas at a diner or tokens at a wash unknowingly added legitimacy to crooked math. Real customers mixed with phantom ones on ledgers, erasing the boundaries that separated truth from invention. That merging mirrored the broader culture of the 20s as well, when jazz, new dances, and shifting morals blurred old lines of respectability. Money laundering was born in the same atmosphere of blending, thriving precisely because it could hide in plain sight. So, when we think of the art of laundering cash, it did not start with complex computers or offshore accounts. It grew from handwritten notes, hidden basements, and small shops whose daily takings looked ordinary enough to mask extraordinary crime. It was a direct response to the practical challenge of holding too much physical currency without a safe place to show it. What began in neon-lit clubs and hushed speakeasies became a shadow practice that mapped itself across neighborhoods and industries. From the glow of those early jazz nights, money laundering stepped into history not as a modern innovation, but as a survival tactic rooted in an era of secrecy and exuberance. The dim rooms, the clattering dice, the hurried scribbles on ledgers, all of it shaped a method that would outlive its pioneers by generations. The streets where gangsters prospered gave birth to a timeless solution, turned shadow into appearance, illegitimacy into a story of everyday trade. But this was only the opening chapter. These dimly lit rooms, humming with music and smoke, were never the final act. They were simply the seed from which larger networks grew. Soon, the laundering of money would not confine itself to neighborhood laundromats or corner diners. It would stretch outward, pulled by ambition, into casinos, banks, and across oceans, weaving itself into the very fabric of the global economy. Why do we call it money laundering? The phrase may sound poetic, but in truth, the image came from something very literal. The laundromat itself became the perfect cloak, and with time, the word laundering grew into both metaphor and definition. As we move forward from the smoky nights of Prohibition, picture rows of metal washing machines, their steady hum hiding a quieter trick. Dirty bills went in, and somewhere on the other side they left appearing cleaner than before. The business of washing clothes became tied to the business of washing wealth. Front businesses worked best when they dealt almost completely in cash. Imagine a car wash with customers pulling in throughout the day, windows rolled down, coins handed over, and bills folded small and damp from everyday use. The register fills naturally, no questions asked. The same picture applies to diners, where constant small payments from plates of eggs and coffee appear normal, or to arcades where young customers pay with quarters that clink as they fall into machines. Cash-heavy businesses create noise, and inside that noise, a quiet fiction can thrive. If records show earnings doubled overnight, no one could easily prove that the counterstaff lied. The surface activity distracted from the layers underneath. Authorities at that time lacked the tools to separate what was genuine from what was invented. Investigators could glance at ledgers but had no baseline to test them. Did a laundromat really see 500 customers in a week? Did all those machines truly spin all night? No city office held the means of measuring. The fragility of oversight allowed arithmetic to speak louder than proof. A shop owner could say, "Yes, this was our busiest weekend yet." And without cameras, electronic data, or digital tracking, no one had evidence to the contrary. This is why the image of washing became so natural. Dirty bills earned through smuggling or gambling could be poured into the tills of a laundromat. The machines rattled, water swirled, and while socks and shirts emerged fresh, the money itself left the books purified. On paper, criminal income disguised itself as everyday customer spending. A laundromat that truly made $200 each day could quietly report $1,000. The cash out matched the report perfectly. Who could say otherwise when banks saw dollar notes identical to any other? The line between genuine washing and symbolic cleansing blurred beautifully. Think of a glass of water stirred with soil. At first it looks cloudy and murky. Let it settle, and the particles fall to the bottom, leaving the surface clear. The ledger worked the same way. Suspiciously dirty money mixed with real receipts. When the day ended, all that remained for the bank or the tax office to see was the clear number on top, an integrated total that seemed unremarkable. Beneath, the darker truth rested hidden, but the surface image appeared pure. This is why the metaphor of laundering felt so apt that it endured. We can also look at this practice through the structure that later came to define laundering as a process: placement, layering, and integration. Each stage already existed within those early storefronts. Placement occurred the moment dirty cash entered the till. Smuggling profits or gambling takings slipped into the register alongside honest coin. Layering emerged when bookkeepers tweaked totals, adjusted the flow, and rewrote figures so the path back to the original crime blurred. And then integration sealed the act when banks accepted the deposits as though they were born of clean trade, reintroducing them into the visible economy. Let's walk slowly through a small example. Imagine a laundromat with 6 machines, realistically pulling in $200 per day. On paper, however, the ledger records $1,000. Behind the counter, $800 of bootlegging money has been added to the register. The owner brings the sum to the bank, presenting it as a week's honest earnings. Placement happens when the smuggler's cash joins the pile. Layering hides its source in tidy handwriting and believable numbers. Integration finalizes the story when the bank credits the amount, and the money now circulates without suspicion. Simple, smooth, and silent. The imagery of bills being washed also offered something psychological. Criminals themselves liked the symbolism. To say their money had been cleaned allowed them to distance themselves from the dirt of crime. It wasn't only accounting, it was transformation. Much as a washing machine finishes its cycle and a shirt leaves ready to wear, piles of hidden bills could exit the process dressed respectably for society. The metaphor held power, and power gave it longevity. Over time, these practices spread too. Every corner where cash-heavy businesses stood, corner stores, small cinemas, gas stations, all served as laundries in disguise. To the casual passerby, nothing looked unusual. People walked in, paid small amounts, walked out. The books grew in size quietly. The system became less a trick and more a routine. Just as Laundry Day repeated calmly in households, criminal cleaning of money found its rhythm in ledgers. One cycle finished, another began, and with each, the underworld grew more confident in its method. Those watching from law enforcement circles began to recognize irregularities, but recognition did not guarantee resolution. Even when suspicions arose, say a shop seemed far busier on paper than on the street, the lack of hard proof left cases idle. Understaffed departments and scarce resources meant few audits reached completion. So the cycle spun onward, self-sustaining, feeding organized crime while shielding it behind the image of ordinary commerce. Here is where the broader, lasting lesson comes into focus. The three steps, placement, layering, and integration, formed a structure so resilient that it continued across decades, expanding with each technological or cultural shift. The laundromat, humble in appearance, became a teaching tool for the entire underground economy. Just as everyone recognizes the symbol of a washing machine spinning out dirt, the same symbol represents hiding illegitimate money within daily life. It is worth reflecting on how natural this metaphor feels even today. To describe money as dirty instantly makes sense. To imagine its cleansing equals social acceptance also makes sense. The visual of a bill passing through a washing machine aligns naturally with the concept of transformation. Linguistically and visually, the pairing was perfect, embedding itself into both criminal slang and later into professional vocabulary. What started in an attempt to mask bootleg profits turned into a universal shorthand. As society grew more complex, the practice did not end with washers and folded laundry, but the seeds planted there set the stage for much larger evolutions. If a laundromat could trick a neighborhood, a casino could deceive far more. If a small diner could feed a modest criminal, a bank could nourish entire syndicates. The metaphor carried forward, just as water once turned cloudy and then appeared clear. The art began humbly, in the rhythm of coins slipping into slots and machines humming as shirts turned, but soon spilled over into the grand arenas of wealth itself. The enduring image of a washing machine gave the underworld its most lasting and recognizable symbol. It showed that the act was not just practical, but symbolic. Money did not merely pass through shops. It left transformed in public imagination. And once that idea took root, laundering became a concept bigger than any single washing machine or cash register. It became a way of understanding how crime could live side by side with ordinary trade, unseen yet constant. And soon, the same concept that quietly spun beneath neon laundromat bulbs would edge into casinos, banks, and eventually entire international systems, weaving that simple metaphor into the much larger world of finance. What thread connects every laundering scheme, past or present? The faces change, the tools evolve, and the technology shifts. But beneath it all, there is a structure that has remained steady. Think of it as a quiet rhythm, a three-part process that repeats in the background, carrying money from shadow into light. These stages are called placement, layering, and integration. They are simple words, but together they form the foundation on which every method sits. Without them, no smuggler, banker, or syndicate could camouflage their earnings. To understand why these steps matter, picture money as a story. At the beginning, the story is filled with obvious flaws, gaps that reveal where it came from, stains that mark it as suspicious. It cannot walk on its own into the wider world. The three stages reshape the story so that by the end, the plot seems ordinary, perhaps even dull. A bill born in the back alley of a gambling den can, through this pattern, reemerge as part of a quiet mortgage payment or an investment account. By then it blends so well that no one questions its background. Let's imagine one small trail. A handful of earnings from street gambling is collected. The first move is to place them inside a bank account. Imagine walking into a neighborhood branch with a few envelopes of mixed small bills. Spread out over time, the deposits no longer look extraordinary. Once inside, the numbers no longer sit like paper stuffed in a bag. They now live as electronic entries. From there, a quick wire sends them across borders into another account. That transaction splits into several others, moving like branches of a tree, each one reaching in a new direction. Finally, from one of these accounts, money is used to buy shares in a development project. The cash that once jingled in backrooms now funds bricks, mortar, and glass. To watchers on the surface, there is no trace of the original game. Each step has carried the money further from its roots, masking it behind a series of believable roles. Placement is the beginning, the act of slipping the illegal funds into the system where they can start their journey. It is often the hardest part because raw cash holds its history so clearly. Too much of it piled up at once, and suspicion rises quickly. So placement favors disguise, breaking amounts into smaller pieces, using cash businesses as covers, or buying simple items such as money orders that can then be deposited naturally. Placement is quiet, steady, and cautious because it is the moment when the outside world might first notice. Layering follows. Here, the goal is to confuse and scatter the trail so that anyone attempting to chase it will lose the path. Think of a wooded forest with many twisting roots. One traveler enters, taking a straight road, but soon that road divides and then divides again until the original direction cannot be found. Wire transfers across jurisdictions, conversions into different currencies, transfers between closely held companies, all of these serve the same purpose. The original source begins to vanish into fog. Each extra step is dew curtain hung between investigator and truth. Some criminals add unnecessary transactions purely for the sake of complication because complexity itself becomes armor. By the end, the chain looks less like a line and more like a maze designed to snare anyone who follows it. Finally comes integration. This stage is what gives the process its reward. After placement and layering, the funds have reached a point where they can reappear openly. They no longer carry the smell of risk. They become down payments on houses, salaries paid through shell corporations, or profits from legitimate investments. Money now wears a clean name, moving alongside funds earned honestly. It can buy influence, property, or even more businesses, often reinforcing the very network that laundered it. In integration, crime money has completed its transformation into socially acceptable wealth. When thought about calmly, these three steps resemble a ritual. First, an offering is placed, clumsy and raw. Then it is carried through a series of motions, turned, folded, and reshaped in a pattern of careful repetition. At the end, what comes out appears polished, ready to blend into ordinary life. The ritual is almost ceremonial in its structure because it has been observed and repeated countless times in countless ways, each practitioner adding variations but never changing the core. Consider how simple acts can become powerful when repeated with intention. Just as families repeat habits each day, criminals repeat these steps, knowing that each completes the cycle. Without placement, the money remains exposed. Without layering, it remains traceable. Without integration, it cannot grow or enjoy its full value. Each step is essential, each dependent on the others. That balance is what has kept the system consistent from the back streets of Prohibition to the skyscrapers of modern finance. The strength of this pattern lies in how it bridges old and new worlds. In the 1920s, cash-laden suitcases were slipped into laundromats. Today, digital wallets move tokens across exchanges. Yet both follow the same logic. A criminal first places funds into a chosen system, then scatters the trail, then emerges with wealth that seems legitimate. Technology might shift the scenery. Coins replaced by codes, envelopes replaced by phone screens, but the skeleton, the three stages, remains. Law enforcement has long recognized this cycle, yet mastery of these steps gives criminals an edge. Placement can be hidden in small, repeated deposits that never draw attention. Layering can stretch across borders where jurisdictions fail to share information quickly. Integration can be cloaked behind booming property markets where prices seem to jump wildly regardless of origins. The adaptability of each stage makes it difficult to pierce. Even when one path is discovered, another continues elsewhere, already cycling again. An easy way to think of this process is through a story of water finding its path downward. Placement is the first drop slipping into soil. Layering is the water branching underground, seeping sideways, splitting into dozens of tiny roots hidden from view. Integration is the spring that emerges elsewhere, clear and flowing freely, with no sign of its journey. Though a river at the surface may look innocent, somewhere far above lay its stormy beginning. The path in between is invisible but essential. To watch how the pattern endures, you only need to look at examples from different eras. During Prohibition, beer hall profits were placed in restaurants. In the 1980s, drug money entered through small wire services. In the modern world, cryptocurrency exchanges fulfill similar roles. Despite these surface changes, the underlying ritual repeats. Nothing in the structure shifts. Place, layer, integrate. These words capture the essence, and they continue to echo like a chant across decades. Understanding this does not only reveal the cleverness of crime, but also why systems struggle to respond. If authorities attack the placement stage, criminals shift their methods. If layering is targeted by new reporting requirements, criminals increase the complexity of their webs. If integration becomes risky, they explore fresh markets like online investments. The skeleton of three steps offers endless ways to adapt, reminding us that strategy often matters more than tools. So this is the skeleton key of money laundering, the quiet framework that has outlived nearly every attempt to change. From the early days of cash-heavy laundromats to the coded layers of digital transfers, placement, layering, and integration remain the pillars. Like three stones placed in sequence, they build a path across the river of suspicion, allowing money to cross unnoticed. And once banks stepped into this picture, the quiet laundromat no longer stood as the only stage. Suddenly, far larger systems were available to carry out these very same steps, multiplying their reach far beyond the corner shop and into the global vaults of finance. What happens when the very institutions built to protect wealth become the very same doors through which crime enters? Banks, with their marble lobbies and watchful vaults, were supposed to represent safety, honesty, and order. Yet, for money laundering, They became not only a pathway, but often the most important piece of the puzzle. With a single account, illegal sums could be made invisible and placed alongside the funds of businesses and families. It was no longer the laundromat owner writing a ledger by hand. Now entire layers of corporate systems gave laundering both speed and protection. Imagine the simplicity of it. A local business may only handle modest amounts, but a bank touches millions every day. Inside that sea of transfers, one river of dirty cash does not scream for attention. It flows, unnoticed, surrounded by countless legitimate streams. And so, laundering gained its scale, stepping out of corners and into international finance where borders blurred and oversight weakened. In offshore havens with few questions asked, secrecy replaced scrutiny. Shell companies formed in minutes, each one a new paper mask to wear. Accounts in distant islands held names that disclosed little, just numbers and codes that shielded origins from view. Some banks approached this world cautiously, perhaps catching hints of suspicion before looking away. Others knowingly welcomed it. For them, fees, growth, and client loyalty mattered more than careful questions. As long as wealth entered their system, they earned returns. So hesitation gave way to participation, and banks, once the imagined watchdogs, sometimes became partners in disguise. In those quiet rooms upstairs, where senior staff met with only the most valuable clients, files passed across tables. Forms were ready, pens moved across paper, and accounts came to life. Later, those same forms hid shadow funds behind polished bank titles. These scenes were not always grand. A discreet officer meeting privately with a client, handshakes exchanged, quiet words whispered about convenience, about keeping things smooth. No loud announcement, no obvious action. Just a nod, a new account, and a large sum of untraceable currency sliding into electronic ledgers. To an outsider, it looked no different than any other wire. To the insider, it meant new doors had opened. The customer was not merely welcomed, they were shielded. The British Bank of Credit and Commerce International, often known as BCCI, stands as one of the clearest examples. Beginning in the 1970s and growing rapidly by embracing markets across continents, BCCI promoted itself as a modern institution serving customers globally. Behind that sheen, it became a vehicle for flows that few other banks would support so openly. It handled profits from illicit trade, helped clients avoid scrutiny, and operated across borders with tactics designed to avoid any single regulator gaining visibility. Some called it a financial supermarket for shadow clients because inside its walls, so many different kinds of questionable wealth passed together. The weight of its story shows how powerful banks could be in this hidden world. With BCCI, laundering no longer looked like local crime hidden in corner shops. It looked like a vast structure of accounts, loans, and transfers stretching across countries. Clients included arms dealers, corrupt politicians, and organized criminals. Each used the same institution, but for different ends, yet the outcome was the same: the removal of risk from dirty wealth, transforming suspicion into influence. No laundromat anywhere could have achieved that reach. When stories emerged and investigations advanced, the scale shocked those who had not been paying attention. Money laundering through banks was not small nor rare, it was entrenched. Billions had crossed through quietly, shaping economies far beyond where the money was first earned. And while BCCI eventually collapsed, its example illustrated the wider truth. Whenever oversight is weak and secrecy available, banks risk slipping from gatekeepers into accomplices. This pattern did not vanish with BCCI. Other scandals through later years showed similar dynamics. Secret meetings, offshore systems, coded transfers, all repeated again and again. Often, the communities harmed most never even knew. Social services short of funding, economies distorted by sudden influxes of cash, it was all linked to systems that had quietly absorbed criminal wealth. And yet, to the public eye, banks still carried an image of trust. People deposited paychecks, paid rent, and borrowed for homes at the same institutions where billions in shadow money passed silently. One could imagine the irony. The same vault meant to signify protection often guarded money no one was supposed to see. And it happened not with dramatic gestures, but with paperwork, signatures, and silent approvals. Inside conference rooms lined with charts and coffee cups, critical decisions turned illicit wealth into something ordinary. The forms carried stamps, the accounts carried numbers, and together they erased the trail of crime. Offshore accounts played an important role in this picture. Small nations provided legal tools that banks used to shield clients. Incorporations could be formed under local laws with near total secrecy. Banks then acted as custodians for these structures, offering storage, transfers, and credibility. Through such arrangements, money that might have raised suspicion at home could flow safely abroad, holding still or reinvesting without questions. Oversight was minimal, cooperation across jurisdictions slow or absent. And so, wealth gained the ability to leap borders faster than authorities could track. Meanwhile, in many cities, branch managers and mid-level officers became part of this story without a spotlight. Their role was humble but crucial. They processed forms without rejecting questionable requests. Some knew, others perhaps chose not to know. But each signature and approval bound the institution into the laundering process. Crime did not need thousands of willing bankers, just enough key people at the right points to keep channels open. This shift meant laundering no longer required the noisy churn of a laundromat's washing machines. It required wires, databases, and quiet agreements. The scale expanded drastically. Where criminal groups once struggled to disguise a few thousand, the banks offered channels for millions at a time. A single transfer, entered into a computer in the late 20th century, could move funds faster and with less risk than years of hiding bundles in closets. When thinking of this, it is almost like comparing a cottage loom to an industrial factory. The small shops handled bits of process at a limited scale, while the banks generated flows vast enough to reshape entire markets. And at times, the banks even taught criminals new techniques, suggesting layers, advising on structures, showing ways to reduce scrutiny. The system had reversed. Instead of defending against crime, parts of it began offering crime a service. The global reach of banks made the spread even more profound. By standing in multiple jurisdictions at once, they acted as bridges across countries. Dirty money could appear in one region and, within hours, reappear safely nested in another, hidden among legitimate funds. Regulators struggled to keep up. Information sharing between countries lagged behind. By the time questions were asked, the trail had grown cold, scattered over countless borders. Yet even within this shadow, banks remained trusted by everyday customers. And that duality is the most striking image. Picture someone walking into a branch to cash a paycheck, waiting in line behind a client depositing funds tied to organized crime. Both handed money to the same institution. Both trusted staff to process it. Yet one transaction built a home, or paid for groceries, the other secured arms, bribed officials, or supported trafficking. The infrastructure served them equally, even as their origins stood worlds apart. This is the quiet contradiction. The vault that suggests guardianship also became the chamber that accepted tainted wealth. Instead of closing the doors firmly, too often they invited crime inside, placing it on shelves beside legitimate savings. And in doing so, they enlarged laundering into something global, industrial, and deeply systemic. With this link established, laundering no longer looked like the humble concealment of prohibition or the metaphor of a laundromat. It became a force capable of reshaping entire industries. It stepped with ease into the halls of high finance, and from there, it naturally sought even more glamorous arenas. Luxury goods, art collections, and towering properties soon became favored vessels. The shadows had entered the banks and, from there, spilled outward into the glittering displays of the wealthy world. How can a painting or a penthouse become cleaner than a laundromat ever was? The question feels unusual, but the answer rests in how wealth hides in plain sight. Where once a laundromat masked a few $100s at a time, the markets of art, jewelry, and real estate provide covers worth millions. They do more than hide. They offer respectability. A diner crowding false numbers onto a ledger looks suspicious if spotted. A penthouse overlooking Central Park, however, raises few eyebrows. Prestige itself becomes a cloak. Let's start with art. A canvas on a wall does not carry a fixed number with it. Value shifts like the weather, determined by reputation, taste, and the whispers of collectors. One person may view splashes of paint as decoration. Another views them as priceless brilliance. Because value bends so easily, art offers a perfect home for questionable funds. Imagine someone buys a painting at a quiet sale for $1 million. Months later, the same painting is resold through an arrangement for $10 million. On paper, a profit appears. In reality, the price was a creation decided by agreement rather than true demand. No machine can prove otherwise, because art prices lack a single standard. That space between perception and truth provides room for laundering to thrive. In grand galleries or private auction houses, numbers leap far beyond everyday logic. It becomes difficult to say whether an artwork truly commands such cost or whether the price performs another purpose entirely. The exchange of a canvas becomes the exchange of legitimacy. Shadow money transforms into a celebrated commodity. Sitting in a living room, the painting tells one story about taste and culture. In bank records, it tells another story altogether, about wealth reborn without its stains. Luxury markets use status. Clean appearance now comes from polished art frames and high-rise windows rather than spinning machines. In a sense, wealth cloaked itself not only in silence, but also in beauty. The more refined the asset looked, the less likely eyes were to examine it. Imagine walking through a modern gallery, seeing paintings hung in quiet halls. Each carries a title, a card with price. Perhaps whispers of famous curators praising its merits. To the visitor, they seem like matters of taste and culture. Yet to some buyers, one canvas might not represent inspiration, but a coded transaction. It tells its story on the wall, while beneath it, another story unfolds in bank accounts. No sign or plaque reveals that secret, yet in this overlap between aesthetics and accounting, Laundering thrives quietly. The same can be seen in lavish apartments that stand unoccupied, curtains closed year after year. To neighbors, it may seem unusual but harmless. To city officials eager for foreign investment, it represents growth. To the hidden buyer, it is safety. The cash they could not explain at home now lives confident inside official property records. It poses as a penthouse or a townhouse, listed respectably, recorded legally, admired architecturally. The crime has put on evening clothes, stepping elegantly onto the stage of global cities. It is worth reflecting on how perception alone makes this possible. If people expect laundromats to see coins rattling and small bills stacking, larger sums look suspicious. If people expect luxury towers to change in value dramatically, then price leaps appear routine. Crime learns these perceptions and uses them as shields. It shows how laundering adapts not by eliminating flaws, but by dressing them in ways society already finds believable. Another layer of protection exists in the way luxury items can cross borders freely. A bill may arouse suspicion in airports, but a watch on a wrist or a ring on a finger rarely merits questions. A deed to an empty apartment abroad passes through legal offices without resistance. Even a painting rolled carefully and shipped overseas can carry millions of dollars in value, more than any suitcase of bills. These channels give laundering both safety and scale. So where the laundromat once offered disguise through modest routines, luxury markets now offer legitimacy through prestige. A person cannot brag about how many extra quarters their laundromat earned, yet they can proudly display art in a gallery or property in the city. The respectability draped over stolen cash makes it invisible, not through secrecy, but through admiration. When seen from this angle, laundering wears two costumes, sometimes common and hidden, sometimes refined and admired. But the mask of luxury has proven more powerful. It makes crime not only blend, but shine. And in that glow, the money sits securely, no longer shadowed by its birth. This is why the term clean takes on new depth here. The money does not simply lose suspicion, it gains status. By the end of its journey, it does not look like crime pretending to be honest trade. It looks like success itself. And that transformation reveals something about the culture money enters. We often praise the glitter of art, diamonds, and towering homes. But within that admiration, laundering finds safety like no other. In the luxury world, crime dresses not in secrecy, but in elegance. The very symbols of wealth, paintings, jewels, skyscrapers, become the tools by which tainted wealth survives and thrives. No barrel in a basement, no corner laundromat with humming machines could ever offer so much. Respectability has become the perfect cover. Yet, as strong as these disguises appear, a new turn arrived. Digital networks holding speed beyond anything galleries or apartments could match. The luxury world protected crime with glamour and time. The digital revolution would protect it with scale, complexity, and instant motion. And once technology entered, laundering would shift again. Now, close your eyes, relax, and let the story guide you. From here, imagine the scenes in your mind as the story unfolds. Is cryptocurrency a silver bullet for transparency, or has it become a cloak for wealth to slip back into the shadows? The answer seems to carry both truths at once. On the surface, crypto was born from the idea of openness. Every transaction on a blockchain is recorded line by line, written into a vast ledger that no single person controls. You can picture it like a book where each page is visible to anyone willing to look. The promise was simple, a system too open to hide corruption, too public to disguise theft. Yet what emerged instead was a paradox, where the very clarity of the open page could be used to conceal as much as it could reveal. Imagine standing at the edge of such a ledger, the blocks stretching on like stones in a long pathway. Each stone carries numbers showing when value moved and where it went. At first, it seems unbreakable in its transparency. Every address, every movement, all there for anyone to trace. And yet, addresses themselves are not names. They are long strings of characters detached from human faces. To the casual viewer, they reveal nothing about the person holding them. It is like watching coins flow through pipes without ever seeing the hands that guide them. This is where the story changes. For every promise of transparency, new methods arose to bring back the comfort of obscurity. Mixers appeared. You can picture them like tumblers filled with coins. People send in their digital money, and inside the tumbler, those coins swirl, split apart, and recombine. What comes back out appears different from what went in. The trail scatters. To investigators, the direct line connecting payer to receiver breaks into fragments. It is as though each stone in the pathway shatters, forcing anyone who chases the path to rebuild it by guesswork. Then there are privacy-focused coins such as Monero. Unlike Bitcoin, where the movement of each coin remains visible even if anonymous, these projects build privacy into their architecture. Transactions are shielded at the very core, using techniques that hide both amounts and addresses. Imagine water flowing through tinted glass pipes. Yes, you see the pipes exist, but you cannot tell what passes through them. For many who sought discretion, this was the answer. It provided a way to store value without the permanent public trace that traditional blockchains held. Another channel exists in over-the-counter trades, often called OTC. Here, instead of using public exchanges where trades can be monitored, individuals negotiate directly. They may meet privately, connect through encrypted chat, or rely on brokers who specialize in large transfers. The money shifts hands without ever walking across the public stage of a marketplace. Value changes form, but no record easy to analyze remains. It is quiet, like passing envelopes in a back room. Only the envelopes now contain digital sums rather than paper notes. For those who enforce laws, these methods mark the modern challenge. They, too, have learned to watch the blockchain, setting up teams that track wallets across borders, study flows, and link activity with real people. At times, they succeed. They track addresses tied to illicit funds. They freeze assets held on exchanges, and they demand that platforms follow stricter rules. Reports must be filed if suspicious movement occurs. Exchanges in many countries must now know their customer, adding names and documents to what once stood as empty addresses. But as each measure appears, new tools push back. Each crackdown spawns more sophisticated mixing services, new layers of privacy coins, and stronger systems of obfuscation. Like the constant push of tide against stone, criminals and enforcers remain locked in motion, each side adjusting when the other builds a wall. A privacy coin grows stronger, a regulator demands more transparency, an exchange tightens rules so private brokers grow more important. No side rests still because the system itself refuses to settle. It can help to imagine this struggle as a kind of arms race. Neither side wins outright, yet each continues to sharpen. Law enforcement builds software, Firms scan ledgers with algorithms, and forensic methods grow more advanced. At the same time, developers create mixers that resist detection, design networks that split transactions into countless small pieces, or invent tokens that encode privacy as default. Back and forth they go, each turn opening a new chapter. For criminals, crypto provides speed like no other system before. A suitcase of bills is slow and conspicuous. A transfer across borders through official banks is weighed down by forms and potential red flags. But a crypto transaction can cross oceans in minutes without setting foot in a building. That speed alone makes it attractive. And yet, the very openness of the ledger means one wrong move can expose everything. An address linked once to a real identity may later reveal the entire web tied to it. This is the cruel tension. The very tool used to disappear can also become the tool that exposes. One image captures this paradox well. Coins tumbling, colliding, and then splitting through a mixer. They reappear scrambled, paths broken, yet the original numbers cannot be destroyed. They still exist, captured in the permanent history of the blockchain. For a while, they are unrecognizable, but with enough time and enough scrutiny, some patterns can be rebuilt. It is a constant gamble between the desire for invisibility and the persistence of the public record. The paradox has deeper meaning too. Crypto shows that transparency, while powerful, is never simple. A tool designed to ensure openness can also give rise to new forms of secrecy. It is like light refracting through glass. Instead of shining straight, it bends, creating shadows and illusions along the way. The blockchain ledger, praised for clarity, doubles as a surface for concealment. It allows both accountability and disguise within the same network. The impact of this duality stretches beyond banks, dealers, and anonymous developers. It reshapes global rules about finance itself. Central banks watch carefully, governments adjust their laws, and investors debate whether cryptocurrencies represent liberation or risk. For some, it is freedom from old gatekeepers. For others, it is an invitation for shadows to spread faster than ever. Picture how this shift feels compared with what came before. A laundromat discreetly inserting extra dollars into its register seemed clumsy and local. Now, billions can move with a few keystrokes, hidden or revealed depending on the pathway chosen. The old hum of machines has been replaced by the silent hum of servers scattered across continents. Where once crime waited for bills to dry beside laundry lines, it now waits for numbers to settle into chains of code. Still, the story is not one of criminals alone. Ordinary people use cryptocurrencies daily, some for investment, some for sending funds home across borders, some for experimenting with new forms of digital value. This makes the picture softer and more complicated. Laundering exists in the same space as legitimate use, much like dirty bills sat alongside clean ones in laundromats long ago. The coexistence provides cover. Normal behavior makes abnormal behavior harder to notice. In the end, crypto taught us something unexpected. The power of transparency is also its vulnerability. A ledger designed to record everything forever allows both honest users and criminal actors to shape its meaning. Where you see openness, another sees a chance to hide. Both are true at once. The paradox stands at the heart of the digital financial world. And once that paradox became clear, the story of laundering took another step. It was no longer only about street criminals finding new methods or banks bending their rules. It grew larger. touching the worlds of multinational power, politics, and global elites. The shadow economy did not stop at the doors of exchanges or the screens of traders. It crept upward, entangling those who already stood in positions of influence. The next scandals revealed that laundering had scaled itself to the very centers of global power, hidden not at the margins, but woven into the fabric of authority itself. What happens when laundering isn't only a trick whispered in a back room, but instead becomes a method carried out by powerful leaders and entire institutions? Imagine the difference. One story involves secret cash pushed through a laundromat's till. The other reveals billions hidden by politicians, major corporations, and celebrated banks. In this second story, laundering stops looking like something criminal gangs invented on street corners. It begins to resemble a hidden foundation of the global system itself, supported not by shadows alone, but by official structures. When scandals broke in recent years, they showed us that money laundering had climbed silently across borders and reached the highest levels of governments and finance. The Panama Papers opened that chapter with a jolt. Picture a quiet law firm, headquartered near the shoreline, keeping drawers full of documents. Inside these files sat thousands of accounts and companies created for others. They were not businesses that manufactured goods or employed workers. They were empty shells, holding property and bank accounts for clients who wanted their names hidden. Journalists investigating the leak pieced together how these shells enabled vast sums of money to transfer without attention. What looked harmless, a paper company based in a Caribbean office, turned out to be a tool for parking fortunes away from taxes and scrutiny. Luxury homes, yachts, even football clubs were tied in subtle ways to these shells. To an ordinary citizen, the news felt surreal, like walking through a street of familiar buildings and discovering each front door led to another secret world. As the report spread, ordinary people saw lists of political leaders, business magnates, and celebrities who had quietly constructed these hidden vaults. The surprise was not only that individuals hid assets, but also how normalized the practice seemed. Offshore activity was not rare, it was central. The leak revealed a culture in which creating a shell firm abroad was almost routine for those with wealth. And the details painted the image further. Numbered accounts stretching into Switzerland, property deeds tracing back to islands, trust funds dotted across havens in the Caribbean. The sense of distance between glamorous towers in London and quiet islands in the tropics began to disappear. Both were points within the same web. Soon after, another wave shook confidence again. The Danske Bank scandal showed how flows of money moved through one of Europe's largest banks without detection for years. Billions of euros from Russia and other former Soviet states traveled across accounts in the bank's Estonian branch. These transfers often passed unnoticed, blending in with ordinary international business. At times, outside brokers even assisted in opening accounts. The numbers stretched so wide that it shifted from being a bank's problem to something larger, evidence of systemic weakness in financial regulation itself. If flows this vast could move for so long, what else might be quietly crossing through other channels? The imagery is stark. Picture an office in Tallinn, relatively modest compared to global financial hubs. On computer screens, transfers appeared as rows of numbers, routine entries, nothing flashy to the naked eye. Yet behind those digits lay ties to oligarchs, figures linked to organized crime, and fortunes of unknown origin. Day by day, These sums left fingerprints in the bank systems, but oversight remained too thin, questions too infrequent. In time, the sheer scale meant that what slipped through quietly in small flows at first became a torrent, washing across the bank unnoticed. When reports surfaced, the numbers nearly eclipsed imagination. Some estimates suggested more than 200 billion euros. That total was so immense, it surpassed the annual economy of entire countries. Where the Panama Papers revealed secrecy rooted in offshore tools, the Danske Bank scandal showed complicity in everyday banking systems. It was not only an issue of distant island firms, it was also about familiar European banks, trusted brands to which citizens handed their savings. When the details came out, confidence cracked. Depositors asked, if these institutions processed hidden billions, how safe were ordinary accounts? Regulators promised reviews. Governments announced reforms. But loopholes were not easily closed. Banking structures stretched across many lands, each with its own laws and its own delays in cooperation. The promise of quick reform met the reality of sprawling complexity. The third story that stunned the world was 1MDB, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Malaysia. Created to support public projects and economic growth, the fund transformed into a global symbol of corruption and laundering at scale. Money meant for development moved instead into luxury goods, super yachts, and Hollywood films. Families saw headlines that spoke not of roads and schools, but of jewels and mansions abroad. For ordinary Malaysians, it meant that wealth belonging to the public quietly financed the extravagance of a few. And the flow did not stop at local borders. Major banks helped process transactions, high-end real estate absorbed investments, and international markets received the ripple effects. Imagine a fund collecting billions in national wealth. Public money gathered to build a brighter future. Then imagine those billions splintering into secret channels. A portion becomes payments for penthouses in New York. Another slice buys artwork by famous painters. Yet another supports film projects in Hollywood. In each case, layers of shell companies and intermediaries disguised the truth. International institutions facilitated transfers, though they sometimes raised mild suspicions. What looked like normal investment one day was revealed as grand embezzlement years later. The scandal showed laundering not as an accident or side effect, but as a mechanism built into state-level corruption. It carried the weight not only of financial crime, but of betrayal of public trust on the most intimate scale. These three scandals, Panama Papers, Danske Bank, and 1MDB, share a thread. Each revealed that laundering did not exist at the periphery of our financial culture. It existed at the center. Caribbean islands with palm trees became as critical to global wealth systems as towering offices in London and Zurich. Local bank branches in Estonia influenced flows of billions that shaped economies. A single sovereign wealth fund spread shadows into markets across the globe. The lesson was sharp. Laundering was not a fringe issue haunting backrooms. It was woven into our most respected institutions and endorsed, whether intentionally or by neglect, at the highest levels. Investigative journalists played a major role in these exposures. Years of quiet work, sifting through vast leaks, following complex trails, and connecting offshore firms to towers of glass. Their discoveries painted vivid pictures of hidden villas on Mediterranean coasts, secret accounts sealed with numbers instead of names, and luxury towers owned by companies that existed only on paper. These images reached ordinary readers, showing that wealth did not always follow the rules they themselves lived under. The contrasts felt deep. Families paid taxes dutifully while powerful figures shifted entire fortunes into safe havens. Governments reacted with public promises. Leaders called for tighter rules, more transparent ownership registries, and stronger oversight of international transfers. Yet years later, loopholes lingered. Paper companies still formed with ease. Offshore centers still thrived by offering secrecy as a service. Compliance requirements slowed some flows, but new paths always seemed to exist. For every box ticked on an oversight form, another unticked loophole remained. Reform proved partial, showing that the system was adaptable enough to absorb pressure without fundamental change. The shock of these revelations lay not only in their size, but in their message. Laundering was not something the system struggled against alone. It was, in many ways, something the system allowed, tolerated, and even relied on. Offshore firms fueled legal service industries. Flows through weak branches fed profits into large banks. Lavish spending of stolen state funds supported global luxury markets. The economy above ground and the economy below ground looked not like rivals, but like partners. Each depended on the other. When the headlines reached homes, their impact was immediate. People around the world felt not just outrage, but unease. If these institutions and leaders were entangled, could citizens truly trust the framework holding their economies together? If numbers in bank accounts could be built on such foundations, what did legitimacy even mean? These were questions the scandals forced into open discussion. They pulled laundering out of shadows and displayed it as a shared reality, one we had walked by every day without noticing. The truth was stark. The shadow economy was not concealed because it was invisible. It was concealed because it stood in places too large and too respected for many to question. Beautiful towers, respected firms, government funds, and familiar bank branches, they sheltered laundering not through secrecy alone, but through the assumption that such institutions stood above suspicion. The headlines tore that assumption apart, revealing the system not to be clean, but comfortably coexisting with stain. From that point forward, it became impossible to think of laundering as an isolated trick. It appeared instead as a system native to our age. The leaks, the bank scandals, the massive flows from sovereign wealth manipulation, each told the same story in different theaters. The stage had grown so large that distance between crime and legitimacy faded nearly to nothing. This realization set the stage for the next chapter. While these grand scandals stretched across nations and billions, underneath them ran quieter stories about how the machinery of laundering reached into everyday lives. Beyond the towers of London or the islands in the Caribbean, the same forces knocked on apartment doors, contacted people through laptops and mobile phones, and recruited ordinary individuals without them even realizing. And that quiet truth, hiding beneath the grand stage, is where the story next unfolds, when crime depends on it. Their story becomes a warning that laundering does not always look like great schemes. Sometimes it looks like ordinary people tricked through social feeds. The scale is striking. In countless school assemblies across Europe, officials now warn students about easy money job offers that ask them to act as financial middlemen. Posters in banks quietly remind youth not to let others use their accounts. The warnings try to resist the quiet trend by showing its face earlier, before the first transfer begins. Yet recruiters adjust. creating more polished ads, crafting fake companies with websites, sometimes even carrying out brief interviews with young recruits to appear real. Just as laundering evolves in luxury towers and cryptocurrency networks, it evolves too inside casual social media posts. This reach into normal lives shows how laundering has shifted from distant story to immediate risk. No one lives next door to a shell company in the Caribbean, but everyone lives beside a teenager with a phone. While billion-dollar scandals show the scale of global corruption, these local stories reveal how easily laundering touches daily existence. It no longer hides only in skyscrapers or auction houses. It hides in direct messages sent to people sitting in their homes after school. The story tells us something about how the underworld survives. Crime cannot hide without cooperation, yet not all cooperation is chosen willingly. By recruiting innocents, teens seeking weekend money, workers seeking extra pay, seniors clicking unfamiliar links, the system replenishes itself silently. It draws energy from lives that otherwise never aim to commit crime. Each new recruit is another stone added to the bridge connecting criminal profits with legitimate accounts. This is how the empire of laundering endures. It survives by bending the paths of ordinary lives. And when seen against the backdrop of global scandals, these small stories bring the meaning into sharp relief. The same laundering that empties public funds into yachts and towers also steals the futures of students through manipulated bank transfers. It is one spectrum, stretching from the grand to the small, always fueled by the need to disguise dirty value as clean. That spectrum cannot function without people, often unaware, who provide the entries laundering needs most: real accounts, real names, real legitimacy. So today, when you hear of laundering cases, remember not only the billionaires or the politicians caught by scandals. Remember the teenager lured by a text promising simple work. Remember the young adult promised part-time money for pressing a few buttons online. Their stories are not separate. They complete the same chain, and the presence of these recruits shows just how close the shadow economy has come to our own daily landscapes. The paradox becomes simple to see. The larger the criminals grow, the more they must rely on the smallest of helpers. The more global the operation, the more it touches the individual household. Crime flows upward into grand luxury, but recruits downward into ordinary lives. The hands of everyday people become both shield and disguise, carrying weight far greater than they realize. Yes, laundering has always required imagination and disguise. Yet in this modern form, it requires something more troubling: the innocence of people who do not suspect they are becoming part of the story. And so the machinery continues. The cycle repeats. Crime taps softly, often through the glow of a phone screen, and someone answers, unaware that they just joined the world's shadow economy. The empire of laundering endures not because of faceless institutions alone, but because it successfully co-opts those who think they are safe from its reach. It thrives not only in towers or secret banks, but in living rooms, dormitories, and coffee shops. That survival tells us a larger truth. Laundering continues by folding innocence into its design, ensuring that its roots reach everywhere, and that reflection brings us gently to the center of the story. If laundering can reach both the grand and the ordinary, if it can use leaders and teenagers alike, then what does it truly say about the nature of money itself? If value can transform so easily, dirty to clean, honest to dishonest, depending on nothing but the story written around it, then perhaps the heart of the question is not about crime alone. It is about trust. It is about value. It is about what we believe money to mean. If money itself can lose its history, what does that mean for the systems that govern our lives? Think of a bill worn at the edges from use, folded into wallets, slipped across counters. Every time it moves, its past deepens. It might have bought groceries yesterday, been pooled for rent the week before, or carried winnings from a small bet days earlier. If each bill carried memory, we would see entire human stories pressed into its fibers. But in practice, money rarely keeps that memory. Instead, it lives only in the present account, the latest entry, the newest transaction. Laundering depends on that, the human ability to forget where money came from once it wears a new mask. Picture this simply. A stained bill moves from a backroom table to a gallery in the city. It is exchanged for a painting and tomorrow sold on again. Once it becomes profit from art, who asks what its prior life was? The border between crime and legitimacy blurs because the act itself writes over history. At that moment, the story of the money no longer matters to the buyer or the seller. It looks clean enough to continue. And so, wealth born from a crime morphs into something that feeds museums, apartments, or even election campaigns. We experience only the surface transaction, never the hidden journey that led there. This is where a quiet tension emerges. How do we know when money has changed its nature? When hidden profits buy art that later funds a school wing, is the school touched by shadow? If tainted money buys election publicity that changes a nation's leadership, is the leadership itself half-shadowed? These questions reveal seams in our trust. Societies, after all, do not function on visible chains alone. They function on belief. We agree collectively to see money as fair exchange, even though it is only paper or numbers. That agreement exists because we trust the system holding it. Yet laundering erodes that trust. It wriggles between categories, showing that wealth can wear two identities at once. Imagine voting in an election, laying quiet hope for the future in a ballot box, knowing campaign posters were paid with hidden flows of money. The vote itself feels pure, but its stage was dressed in shadows. Or imagine a condo rising in your neighborhood, jobs created, businesses benefiting, while its purchase was funded by embezzled sums from far away. The building stands as prosperity in plain sight, but beneath its gleaming windows, old harm rests. How do we separate good outcomes from bad origins? Or do we stop asking altogether, accepting any wealth that hides well enough? Here lies the philosophical conflict that laundering seeds. Trust is meant to bind communities. When citizens pay taxes, it is not love for paperwork. It is trust that pooling resources builds schools, hospitals, and roads. When families deposit savings in banks, it is not fondness for ledgers. It is trust that those funds remain safe. When businesses trade, it is trust that value exchanged holds meaning tomorrow. Laundering erodes that bond gently, not with crashes or riots, but with quiet suspicion. If so much hidden money moves unseen, do we know which part of the economy grows clean and which part grows dirty? And if we cannot tell, then trust, even if not spoken aloud, begins to fray. Take this thought more gently. Money itself is not wood or stone. It is a symbol. It holds power because people agree it does. In this way, money is a story written collectively each day. A note printed by government has value only because we decide it represents worth. A digital entry in an account has value because we trust that the system records faithfully. If story sustains money, then laundering becomes the craft of rewriting the plot. The bill no longer belongs to smuggling. It belongs to a townhouse deed. The transfer no longer comes from fraud. It comes from a respected company. The story changes, and with it, the meaning of the money. When rewriting happens at scale, reality itself bends. This is why laundering is not only about criminals protecting profits. It is about power. It is the art of controlling which story money tells, and therefore shaping how society perceives value. A fortune once illegal becomes accepted, enters polite conversation, and even supports politics. For the few who master this art, reality itself shifts, because money speaks louder than memory. If wealth can be reborn clean, then so can its holders. They too step from shadows into acceptance, not through confession, but through disguise. Think of societies long past. Empires rose and fell not only by battles, but by control over resources, trade, and legitimacy. Gold plundered from conquests was melted, reshaped, and stamped anew. Coins lost the image of capture and bore instead the face of sovereigns. The story changed, and with it, legitimacy. In our era, laundering plays the same role. It reshapes wealth from hidden origin into official face. The act is not simply concealment, it is transformation, and transformation changes power. Now take a pause and picture daily life again. Most of us earn wages, pay bills, save, spend, and plan. In those cycles, money means work, exchange, and survival. But above that, another class of money drifts, written and rewritten by laundering, wearing masks suited to its moment. These two species of money travel together, indistinguishable once they meet in markets or banks. This thought bends perspective. The same grocery purchase may be funded from clean wages and stained wealth side by side without difference in the transaction. If money can lose its history, then perhaps history itself can be reshaped by money. A leader funded by disguised wealth influences policies. A city skyline built with shadow money alters neighborhoods. A school sponsored by donations from laundered accounts teaches children who will never question the source. In each instance, outcome looks normal or even positive, but the origin threads backward into crime. Power disguised as generosity spreads its roots silently. There is a quiet unease here. If society cannot distinguish clean money from dirty once disguised, then all wealth becomes uncertain. Yet economies keep turning. Salaries get paid, rent transfers arrive, investments grow. People continue living with trust intact enough to function. This ability to move forward despite uncertainty shows both strength and fragility. Strength because humans adapt and continue. Fragility because silence around origins invites deeper erosion. Imagine a library filled with books. Each book tells a story. If some books have missing chapters, false twists, or rewritten endings, yet still rest on the shelves beside honest volumes, the library's record of truth weakens. Similarly, if some wealth hides its creation story while others reveal it, and both sit side by side in the economy, then our collective sense of fairness tilts. The shelves still hold books. The money still flows, but truth becomes blurred. This is why laundering must be seen not just as crime, but as influence. It bends not only numbers, but values. It changes not only accounts, but perceptions. It decides what wealth appears respectable, and therefore who becomes respectable. In this sense, Laundering is less about evading law and more about shaping culture. Once enough story is rewritten, society begins to accept the new version as if no other ever existed. Reflect softly on what this means. If you trust a banknote, if you trust a transfer, if you believe that paying for goods is fair exchange, then understand that belief rests on shared fiction. Money's meaning is only as strong as the stories holding it upright. When laundering interferes, those stories warp. Still, people keep reading them because few can pause the cycle of exchange. That paradox, believing in something even when unsure of its purity, may be the most revealing truth of all. So, when we look at laundering, we see more than the concealment of crime. We see the rewriting of reality. Money, stripped of history, emerges with new roles. It no longer reflects only what was done to gain it. It carries what can be done because it appears clean. That transformation turns laundering into a tool not just for survival, but for bending the narrative of power itself. And in this recognition, the story edges toward its quiet center. For if money can change its tale so fully, if its stains can be removed until no trace remains, then the question left is larger than individual scandals or transactions. It becomes a question about how we define value, belief, and trust in the systems that surround us. The act of laundering is not only hidden movement, it is hidden authorship, rewriting the book that all of us must read. Behind every hidden transfer lies a quiet reshaping of the world we walk through each day. What seems like one private act ripples into cities, markets, and even choices about who holds power. If money can lose its story so easily, then we must ask ourselves what value truly means when its origins can vanish without trace. Take a breath and look softly at that thought. The art of money laundering reminds us that power does not live only in politics or armies, but also in those who decide what money itself is allowed to mean.